In the workshop, we use a variety of squares for, basically laying things out, checking squareness of things. Most often, I use a combination square. I probably use this 80% of the time. I have a couple different sizes. Of course, a 12-inch. I've got a 6-inch. And I happen to have a 9-inch, which is fairly rare from what I've noticed. Don't use this one that often, but once in a while I need 3. I typically will use these not only for checking square, but to check the set a dimension from the head to the end of the square. I also use tri-squares, not nearly as often as the combination square. This one is the biggest one I have. I made this one. The blade on this one is about 15 inches long. I have a couple of smaller ones. This one I think is about 10. This one's about 6 inches. This one lives at my jointer, and I use it to make sure that the fence on the jointer is square. The middle-sized one I rarely use. This one I use just when I need a bigger square. So it definitely comes in handy at times. The smallest tri-square I have is an engineer square, and that just basically a metal tri-square. So that gets used a lot, only typically when I'm sharpening. I have another one here, another tri-square here that I made. It's basically a Bridge City knockoff. There were plans on one of the magazines a while ago on how to make this. So it's a beautiful tool. I tend not to use it that often. Also have this one. It's not really a square, but it's called a Japanese miter square. And it's handy because from the reference, you can measure, kind of an inside angle or an outside angle or obtuse or acute, that kind of thing, which is similar to this one. I don't know if I've ever used it, but once again, it's nice because from the reference, you can measure acute or obtuse angles. The last one I have here is a saddle square. And this I use when I'm doing joinery. I also have a dovetail marking tool, which it wouldn't be considered a square, but I use that a lot too for joinery. So what I'm going to do is walk through the steps of making a wooden tri-square. Looking through my scrap wood, I found a couple of pieces that I think are going to work well for this project. So I've got this piece of, I believe it's shedua, and it's about the right size. I think it's about 2 inches, just under 2 inches, about 1 3/4 wide. It's about 3/16 thick, which is a little too thick, so I'll plane that down. And it is 11 and a half. I'm going to cut it down to about 10 inches long. So it'll be almost 2, or I should say, when I'm done, it'll be maybe a little over 1/8 by about 1 3/4 by 10. For the stock, I've got some bocote, and it's roughly the same, in this case, thickness, and that will become the width. And it's got a nice grain pattern to it. I wanted something kind of on the dark side, and you can see here this wood. This was planed. It's lighter when it's fresh, but it darkens up over time. This plane was made of the same wood, so you can see it gets quite dark. And just visually, I wanted it darker than the blade. As far as dimensions go, like I said, I'm going to go down to 1/8 plus on this, probably about 1/2 inch thick. And on the length of this, I measured all the squares I have, and looking around, typically you want about a 1.6 ratio between the blade and the stock. Most of the ones I have are in that range, 1.6, 1.7, something like that. So if this is 10 inches, I'll make the stock, maybe 6.5 inches. So I have hand planed this nice and flat. I made sure it was square. I'm going to, on the bandsaw, I will rip this a little over half, and then I will hand plane it down to get it smooth. Both of these pieces have been in my shop for quite a while, so I don't expect them to warp much. This one is pretty near its final thickness. Quite often when we're ripping something and removing a lot of material, so what I'm going to end up with is a half here. I'm removing most of that, so I would expect what's left to warp if this was fairly fresh in my shop. But like I said, it's been here a long time. I'm assuming it'll stay pretty flat. If not, we'll straighten it. I ripped this on my bandsaw, and it is 550 thousandths, so just a little over a half an inch thick. So I think that's going to work out well for this. I thought it was pretty flat. I think it appears to be. I don't know if you can hear that. So it's different here versus there. So I think it does curve up slightly, but I mean, we're talking probably a few thousandths. So that's pretty flat. So I'm just looking at the grain here, and the grain looks pretty parallel to the edge. I'm going to hand plane this with my number 5. I want a relatively long plane for this, and get it nice and smooth. And we'll see how parallel and square everything is. It's not super important that these faces are flat and parallel, although I'm going to try to do that. But what's most important is that the front and back, I'll call it, the stock or the edges of the stock are square and parallel to each other. So I'm going to be using my calipers to measure in various spots to make sure things are as close as I can get them. Now I am going to be using hand tools as much as possible to make this. So I'm trying to avoid the table saw and the jointer. We'll see how that goes. So it feels pretty flat. I'm getting fairly consistent, but despite the fact that it's off the bandsaw, so it's rough, but relatively flat. So for a while, I'm just going to be getting just fuzz here. So I'm feeling and watching what's going on here. So it's not hitting yet at the end, but it's hitting pretty much everywhere else. So it was pretty flat. And two passes on this is enough to get this whole surface. So I'm doing one, kind of off to one side, the other one on the other side. So I'm going to continue to do this. I will check it once in a while. So like at the moment, I'm at 542. That's 538. 544. If I'm within, 5 to 10 thousandths for this thickness, that's going to be fine. So I'm going to continue till I get this a little bit closer. I've got this really close now. I'm within, here I'm at 536, 535, 37, 36. So this area is all really close to parallel. It does get a little thinner at this end, so I only need 6 inches or so I'll stick to this end. One thing I was noticing, I was getting a little bit thicker on one edge, which I've since fixed. But I think a part of that might have been, I had a fairly big gap here. And I'm always concerned with a gap there that the wood is flexing a little bit as I'm planing. So what I've done is I've put a stop here. This would normally get clamped in my face vise, but I don't want to be working down there right now. So I've just got this clamped to the edge of my bench here. this is fully sitting on here, fully supported. Obviously, that'll keep the part from moving. And I'm going to switch here to my smoothing plane and just take a few more passes here just to get this nice and smooth. Yeah, it's taking a little nicer shaving. Feels a touch smoother. Yeah, I'm getting actually a nice shaving. This wood is really hard, so that's a good sign. Okay, so that seems to be going well, and I'm going to do the other side. Okay, I think that's going to be good. So I'm going to check now the edges. See how good those look. So that's 1803, 1800, 1803. So it's a touch. Yeah, that's now I'm getting 1802. It's pretty darn parallel. I'm going to take a couple passes. Now, I could clamp this in my face vise or, clamp it on top of the bencher and plane this, but that's difficult with such a narrow piece. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut this roughly to length, and I'm going to do this on my shooting board. That way I can ensure that the plane stays square as opposed to trying balance on that little edge. And that's maybe doable, but once I get to this one, it's really going to be difficult. So the shooting board is going to make that much easier. Okay, so there's my stock. Before I shoot the edges of this, I want to get the ends square. So I've got my shooting board here. And okay, that's not doing much. Touch more. There we go. Okay, that's most of that surface. This is hardwood. The other end. Okay, so like I said, I want to do the edges next. Now, this is actually short enough. I could probably do that, and maybe I will. But I do want to show you another option. If this was longer, in fact, when I do the blade, this isn't going to work. It's a little bit too long. I'd have to bring the plane way off here to do this. So I'm going to switch to a different shooting board. And it works a little differently than this one. So this is it. Now, on this shooting board, this edge or this step is not a reference, right? On a typical shooting board, the plane is riding along this surface, and I don't know if you can see that, but you can see a dark line there where the edge of the plane is riding along there, and it's not dark above there because that's where the blade is, right? The blade's a little bit higher than the edge of the shooting board. But for this type of shooting board, I'm not riding the plane on that edge because my reference at the end is too small to really be reliable to get things square and parallel. So I'm going to use this a little differently, but first I need to clamp this in place. This doesn't have a cleat on it like the other one does. Okay, I ran into some issues I had to figure out. So what was going on? I switched shooting planes first so that I could set one of these this one at a finer cut than the other one. I had to set this one a little deeper just because I'm doing the end grain of a very hard wood. And I didn't want to readjust that if I didn't have to. So I got out this plane which was the first shooting plane I made. And I was, trying to shoot this, and I wasn't cutting, and I messed with it and ran in circles a few times. Finally realized what's happening is, and you can probably see this, the blade is up above the surface. So I wasn't cutting the whole edge here. I was missing the bottom. So I'd take one pass and it would work okay. And then the next pass it wouldn't, because I'm writing wood on wood, not blade on wood. So I just found another piece of this bocote kicking around. It doesn't matter what it is. I just need to space that up a little bit. And now it's working fine. Now I want to point out, like I said, this edge, this shoulder here is not my reference when I'm using this shooting board. My reference is the wood itself. So just like if I was hand planing this, I need to, at the beginning of the cut, be pushing down at the toe. And then as I go through, I change my pressure to push towards the back. Now, it's a little trickier to do with the shooting plane, but that's what you have to do in order to get this to work correctly. So when I'm starting the cut, I'm pushing with my fingers. So I'm pushing, very exaggerated like that. And as I go through the cut, towards the end, I switch to the back. And if you don't do that, you're gonna create a crown surface, and obviously that's not what we're looking for. So I did the one side. I've got it nice and straight now. I don't want to mess with it. So I'm going to turn this around and do the other side. Now I also found that this is a little tricky to do just because this wood is kind of slippery here, so it's a little hard to hold it so it doesn't move. But that's part of why I want a really fine cut on this, so the forces aren't too high. So I think I'm got that held in place there. There we go. Okay, so got a nice complete shaving there, and I will check. Nice and smooth. It's very obvious which way the grain is going. Right on this side, I want to go that way, and over here like that. So we'll see how accurate that is. So that's 762, 762. All right, can't argue with that. That's pretty darn close. So I'm very happy with that. That just kind of lucked out there. I left this a little long in case the ends get beat up, so I'll cut this to 6 inches. I think it's like 6.5 right now, maybe 7. And then I'll do the same with the blade. First thing I'm going to do, though, is get this a little bit thinner. All right, so I've been working on this a little bit. I check it once in a while to make sure it's pretty flat, and I can see if I flip it over here. Yeah, the whole thing has a bit of a curve like that. So I'm going to see. Of course, the trick is with this, this flexes so easily. As I plane, it's going to go flat. So I really want to take off some in the middle here. See if I can do that. So I'm turning the plane sideways so I'm not using the edges or the ends of the plane as a reference. See if I got. Oh, they got rid of most of it. Okay, so that looks pretty good. It was easier than I thought. Okay, so I'm going to flip that back over, and now it'll probably take take a shaving at the beginning and the end. Let me just, I'm going to force it to. I want to leave it a little bit fat or thick because I'm going to cut my slot in here for this to go into. And if ideally it's a touch tight, and I'll plane this down to fit. So maybe I'll stop there. Right now I'm at 215, about 218, 218, 211. It's a little thinner at that end. It's looking pretty good though. So I may, yeah, see, I'm over 220 there. So this corner's a little bit big. So I'm going to tweak that a little bit more, and then I'm going to cut that slot.